Hey everybody, it's that time of year again, so here's my thoughts on E3 for this year. Gameplay in the background is going to be of Far Cry 2, specifically the Fortunes Edition, and that is because I'm working on it for an upcoming review of Redux. Do not ask for an ETA because I do not know when it's going to be out. I do know it is going to be out before I review Far Cry 5 though, which is something I will talk about in this particular video. So believe it or not, it is actually relevant to the discussion here. Now I'm going to do something a bit different from what I've done for previous years in that I'm not going to go over every single thing that they showed off at E3. I'm going to hit the highlights and I'm going to talk about what looks good and what looks pretty bad and things that I'm utterly baffled about, such like that. So let's go ahead and start delving into this thing with the first conference that I saw, which was the Microsoft conference. Now their big thing for that was the new Xbox, the Xbox One X. Now, of course, this is a really dumb name for what is a fairly marginal upgrade over the previous Xbox. It is capable of rendering at 4K. It doesn't necessarily mean it's rendering well at 4K, because apparently Destiny 2 is coming out in 4K for Xbox One X, and it will be running at 30 frames a second. Meanwhile, of course, PC can run 4K 60 FPS because it has an uncapped frame rate on PC, and the hardware is actually capable of handling it if your PC is actually good enough. Which of course brings up my main problem with the Xbox One X. It's only for people who are really into 4K and can't really afford a big gaming PC that's going to absolutely crush 4K games. That's a pretty niche market. And honestly, the sheer amount of 4K that Microsoft was pushing at this year's E3 really tells me that the industry has pretty much run out of ideas. It's not about innovating in gameplay mechanics, it's not about innovating in storytelling or the actual stories themselves, it's not about innovating in even terms of input devices. Instead, it's about taking what we already know from the past basically decade and just making it prettier, and honestly, that's really not enough of an improvement. Of course, the industry seems to think that your average gamer is all about just shiny things being dangled in front of their face, so for a lot of people it may well be what they're looking for. But for people like me, who've been with gaming for a long time, I don't think most of us really give too much of a crap how the game looks as long as it runs well and plays well. I run a 144Hz monitor. I don't really care as much about visuals as I do about performance and gameplay, and that is something that is completely lost upon the Xbox One X. The industry has become pretty much stagnant, and no amount of prettier graphics is going to change that. Now sure, maybe the additional processing power will help developers realize visions that they couldn't necessarily see before, but you would think that in the time it's been since the Xbox One came out, we would have seen some actual innovation in terms of gameplay, instead of just a recycling of the things that came from the last generation. And that sort of thing was on full display throughout the rest of that particular conference. Forza Motorsport 7, Metro Exodus, the third in the ridiculously overrated game series, Assassin's Creed Origins. I've even lost count of how many Assassin's Creed games they are. The only thing that makes it look interesting is that it's set in ancient Egypt, but even then they're still adapting a lot of generic mainstream gameplay mechanics to it and saying, okay, that's good enough for innovation or something. State of Decay 2. Not only is it a sequel, but it's another frickin' zombie game. Crackdown 3. Now, I haven't played the first two games yet, although I do have the second one sitting around here somewhere, but it's the third game in the series. It's nothing particularly new. Life is Strange, the prequel, Before the Storm. Again, haven't played Life is Strange yet, it's sitting in my Steam library waiting for me to get around to it, but it's a prequel to an existing game. Middle-earth Shadow of War, almost the exact same as Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor. They showed gameplay of it, and it looks almost exactly the same, down to every single minute mechanic. Or in The Will of the Wisps, another sequel. Black Desert Online, basically they're just porting an existing MMO to the Xbox One. PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, existing game being ported to Xbox One. Yet more crap for Minecraft, because apparently for some baffling reason they seem to think we need Minecraft in 4K. And the sad part is, even the new IPs that they're bringing to the table really don't look all that different. The notable exception is the game called The Last Night, which is this sort of neo-noir cyberpunk thriller kind of thing that looks really cool, and I'm curious to see how they turn out with it, because it has a very unique art style, and on top of that, it's a neo-noir kind of thing, and I'm a sucker for noir. Sea of Thieves, they've been showing it off for several years now, and it's still not out. Which, as far as I can tell, it's a lot like Guns of Icarus, which means that it's a crew-based game where you go on your ship and you just kind of goof around until you win. Of course, they finally set a release date for Cuphead, so I guess that's nice for the people who give a crap about that. But then they showed off Anthem, which is, as far as I can tell, just Destiny with exosuits, so that's nothing new either. And the other big announcement they had at the Xbox conference was the fact that the Xbox One is actually getting backwards compatibility for original Xbox games, which is really cool. There actually were several games on the original Xbox that were a lot of fun to play, and you can't get them on 360 or Xbox One. Now, what I'm hoping is that the Xbox One backwards compatibility with original Xbox games is actually better than the 360's version, because the 360's backwards compatibility is really hit or miss. But something else that was pretty cool with that was that Phil Spencer actually confirmed that he wants to bring that capability to PC as well. To which I say, gimme gimme, because I would absolutely love to be able to play original Xbox games on my friggin' PC. I actually have several original Xbox games that will not work on my 360, and I don't have an original Xbox to run them on. Even if it required you to go through the Windows 10 store to get the app to actually run Xbox games on your PC, I would still go for it because that's actually a really cool feature, and I really do hope they bring it to PC. But even for just the Xbox One, that's actually really good news because it adds even more value to the console. Plus, it's something that Sony doesn't have, and they don't seem to be remedying it at all. So I guess we'll see where that goes, but at the very least, the Microsoft conference didn't really leave me very enthused. I was left even less enthused when I watched the Bethesda conference. Now, I know what you're saying. DW, you just hate Bethesda. To which I say you are being too general with that statement because I hate Bethesda Game Studios, the developers of Fallout 4 and Skyrim, for what they have done to their own series, whereas I don't really mind Bethesda as a publisher too much. A lot of people cannot separate Bethesda Softworks, which is now the publishing arm of the company, versus Bethesda Game Studios, which is the actual in-house developer. Believe it or not, they are actually two separate entities. Now, the big thing for the Bethesda conference was that they're bringing the new Doom to VR, which looks hilariously bad, and Fallout 4 to VR, which also looks hilariously bad. Because what we really needed from a janky game like Fallout 4 was to make it even jankier. And as for Doom VFR, I mean, they spent a good quarter of that particular presentation showing off not much more than puzzle solving, which was not Doom in the slightest. Anyway, they went on to introduce a few other things. They showed off Skyrim for the Switch, which I guess they're just going to make a living from now on, just re-releasing Skyrim every few years on different systems and for slightly different reasons. Which, you know, I guess more money for them because people still buy them for some utterly baffling reason. But whatever. They also brought attention to their attempts at cash cows through Elder Scrolls Online, which the new expansion is Morrowind, and of course Elder Scrolls Legends, which is the CCG, neither of which I give a single solitary crap about. What I do give a crap about, however, is the so-called Creation Club, which is paid mods. Which amuses me because Steam tried that, and when Steam tried that, there was a massive backlash. When Bethesda tried it, apparently nobody bats an eye. And if you are okay with paid mods through the Creation Club, but were not okay with it on Steam, then guess what? You are a hypocrite. Also, more importantly, if you're okay with the fact that paid mods are just additional microtransactions and you want them in your games, then you should stop gaming entirely and go far away. You know why? Because you are what is wrong with the gaming industry. You are why microtransactions get shoehorned into everything ever these days. You are why developers will introduce updates to their games from years ago that will put microtransactions in them because they know they can get away with it. But most importantly, if you are okay with the idea of the developers of a game making money off of the mod community, then you are actually encouraging them to not finish the game, let the modders finish the game for them, thus requiring less effort on their part, and then basically making free money off of that. To say that is a despicable idea is an understatement. And if you are somehow okay with the Creation Club, that is basically what you are being okay with. Anyway, rant aside, there were actually a couple of interesting announcements at the Bethesda conference other than that despicable idea of paid mods. Those were Dishonored, Death of the Outsider, which is a standalone expansion of sorts to Dishonored and Dishonored 2, so I'm looking forward to that, seeing what they do with that. They announced The Evil Within 2, which I still need to play through the first one. I have it in my Steam library, I just haven't gotten around to it yet. But the new one actually looks somewhat interesting, so we'll see where that goes. And of course they showed off the new Wolfenstein game, which, after the New Order and the Old Blood, I'm not particularly looking forward to. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for some Nazi stomping, but here's the thing. The New Order suffered from not really getting all of its priorities straight, because Wolfenstein is all about stomping some Nazis, and while you do certainly stomp Nazis in Wolfenstein The New Order, it also forces an awful lot of story down your throat, and it's really not a very good story. And if they do that with the sequel, then that will mean they learn basically nothing from their mistakes. Oh, and speaking of learning nothing from your mistakes, Quake Champions. You see, I've actually played Quake Champions. I played the beta. In fact, I played a fair bit of the beta. I was going to do an MTO on it, but then I decided that I would just rather wait until the full game comes out and see if they manage to fix the issues with it, which I very highly doubt they will. See, the beta suffered from absolutely terrible netcode, as well as balancing problems because certain characters are just blatantly more powerful than others. You see, as it turns out, trying to put MOBA-styled characters into an arena shooter actually unbalances the game something fierce, and it's not really something you can easily fix. Oh sure, they could put in a classic mode where everybody has the same health and armor and speed and everything, but that's not gonna get played all that much, I imagine. Because this is not a game aimed at the old school Quake players. It is a game aimed at new people who know basically nothing about Quake. And it shows. And the esports angle they were trying to take at E3 this year was not only laughable, it was actually kind of insulting to your intelligence. Hey guys, we think that this completely unbalanced game is going to be the next big esport, because, you know, Quake and esports and stuff. Bethesda, let me level with you for a second. It takes more than just saying a game is an esport to actually make it an esport. And you need to realize that before you release Quake Champions. Anyway, the Bethesda conference was bad enough that even people who are normally fans of Bethesda games were like, wow, this sucked. And I really can't blame them. Beyond that, Devolver Digital had their first ever E3 conference where the only legitimate show-offs they did were Ruiner, Serious Sam's Bogus Detour, and a very small glimpse at Absolver while they were making jokes about things and constantly being ridiculous. Their entire conference was actually just a parody of E3 conferences, and it actually was pretty amusing until they went after that, and then they had a sequence where people were just being morons on Twitch. Anyway, moving on to the next bit that I was looking forward to, the PC show, where they showed off a bit of Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord, which we still don't have a release date, and I'm still getting more and more irritated about that fact. We saw a bit of Total War Warhammer 2, which is always nice, although it seems like they're kind of shoveling that out quicker than I would hope. Because even though I actually have it sitting in my Steam library, I haven't actually had a chance to play Total War Warhammer 1 yet, so I'll have to go through that before I eventually get around to Warhammer 2, even though I think it's actually coming out this year. Beyond that, we did get to see some gameplay of the upcoming game Battletech, which is an adaptation of the tabletop war game, which I'm pretty pumped about because it's MechWarrior but the original source material. So I'll definitely be covering that when I get the chance. Anyway, moving on, we did get to see some of Lawbreakers, the upcoming game from Cliff Bleszinski, and I believe Boss Key Productions is the name of the studio. Now, I've had that sitting in my Steam library for a while as the beta version, and I just never got a chance to play it. So when they launch the next beta, I'll be taking a look at that and seeing what's going on with it, because it did look pretty interesting, and they did announce that the full version of the game is going to launch on August 8th, so I'll be taking a look at it after that as well. And I have to admit that I was chuckling quite a bit at Cliffy B's statement regarding that. He said, $29.99, none of that $60 multiplayer-only bullshit. And you know what? I respect and appreciate that. So we'll see how that one turns out. But other than that, there really wasn't anything at the PC show that was particularly interesting to me. I mean, they showed off the expansion pack that's coming up for XCOM 2. It's called War of the Chosen. and I don't really care about that right now because I still haven't finished XCOM 2. It's something I'm working on, I just haven't gotten around to finishing it yet, so we'll see how that goes. And then of course there was the big announcement at the PC show, which is Age of Empires Definitive Edition. Now, I did find it amusing the way they introduced it, because they said, oh, the game is so secret I can't even tell you what the title is until after this trailer. So then they start the trailer, and the very first thing you hear is... So if you're any sort of self-respecting Age of Empires fan and you didn't know what they were doing, then that's kinda on you. But we are finally getting a remastered version of Age of Empires with the Rise of Rome expansion, and it is coming to PC. Unfortunately, it's only coming to the Windows 10 store right now, so I guess we'll see how that goes. But it's going to feature remastered sound, remastered graphics, a classic mode to be able to switch back to the old visuals and sound, which is kind of cool. And of course various balancing tweaks as well as pathfinding improvements and such like that. So I'm definitely looking forward to that, because Age of Empires, it was in desperate need of a re-release, because nobody could get it except for a physical copy anymore. So it'll be nice to have that available in digital form, but I was more excited about what the guy who was there presenting it said about what they were going to do for the future of Age of Empires, because this year actually is the 20th anniversary of the Age of Empires series. The first game came out in 1997. And he said that later on at Gamescom this year they're going to make another announcement, but they are keeping that under wraps for now. I'm hoping it's Age of Empires 4, because we've been waiting for that for about a decade now. And another Age of Empires might be what's needed to kind of reinvigorate the real-time strategy genre, although I'm not sure if that's even possible in a post-StarCraft world. I guess we'll just have to wait and see on that. Anyway, moving on to other elements of E3 this year, the Ubisoft conference, of course, showed off things that they've already announced, Assassin's Creed Origins. They showed off yet another friggin' Just Dance game, even though nobody seems to care about those. And they showed off some more Far Cry 5, which is always nice. It looks like it'll be an interesting setting, at least. And we finally got a release date for the second South Park game from Obsidian, so that's nice for the people who've been waiting for that. I actually still have not even picked up the first one, the Stick of Truth, so I'm not really putting that one on my radar right now. To be perfectly honest with you, I really don't like South Park all that much. I've never really found it all that funny apart from the World of Warcraft episode. So the Stick of Truth and its sequel are not really something that's on my radar very much, even though they are made by Obsidian. Anyway, Ubisoft did also show off a new game that they're making called Skull and Bones, which is a sort of pirate action game, and it looks a lot like Assassin's Creed's pirate sections, so I guess we'll see how that turns out. Although after the absolute mess that was For Honor, and of course the just why is this even a thing game of Ghost Recon Wildlands, I'm really not looking forward to it. Nor am I looking forward to The Crew 2. See, I have The Crew because they had it available for free for a while and I just added it to my Uplay library, but I'm not going to play it because it's a racing game and it's online only and it looks incredibly dumb. And while I'm not really all that surprised they made a sequel, I have to ask, who wanted this? Knowing what you know about the original game, The Crew, why would you want a sequel? But I guess they figure there's a market for it since they are making it. But then of course they also announced that they're finally working on Beyond Good and Evil 2 again. So that's kind of neat. Although I'm not really a big fan of how they decided to go all edgy with it and make everybody cuss like sailors. That's just unnecessary, and after a while it got pretty annoying. But here's the thing, I still need to actually go through the original Beyond Good and Evil, so I won't be reviewing Beyond Good and Evil 2 until after I do that, of course. Don't ask me for an ETA on that, because I don't know when I'm going to be able to get around to the original Beyond Good and Evil. I do have it in my game library, though, so I will be able to take a look at it eventually. Anyway, the Ubisoft conference in general was really not all that great. I think people were just excited for the new South Park game and Beyond Good and Evil 2 more than anything else, which is why they were ultimately praising it. Moving on to the Sony conference, which was kind of a laughing stock, honestly. See, I don't have a PlayStation 4, and I'm probably never going to get a PlayStation 4. Therefore, I don't really care about PlayStation exclusives, like Uncharted: The Lost Legacy, which is yet another friggin' Uncharted game, because that was necessary. And of course, DLC for Horizon Zero Dawn, and so on and so forth. Days Gone looks like yet another zombie game, so not excited about that at all. They showed off more of the upcoming God of War, which looks like a pretty generic hack-and-slash game. Woo. They showed off some Destiny 2, which is coming to PC, and if I ever actually get it, I'll look at it on PC. They gave us a trailer for the upcoming Call of Duty World War II, which people stop asking me about that. It's yet another frickin' generic World War II first-person shooter in the modern military shooter style. I do not care about it. Especially not after Call of Duty Infinite Warfare was literally unplayable. Anyway, moving on. Monster Hunter World. Don't really care if it's a PlayStation exclusive. If it's coming to PC, I'll take a look at it, but otherwise, meh. And I certainly won't be looking at it before I end up going through Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate on the Wii U, as well as, of course, Monster Hunter Generations and Monster Hunter 4 on the 3DS. Although in those cases, if I'm going to do a video on them, I need to figure out a recording solution for the 3DS. Anyway, we did also get more of Detroit Become Human, which is the upcoming game from Quantic Dream, which means it's going to be a ridiculously pretentious, glorified cutscene from David Cage. Speaking of, I really need to get around to actually finishing the mess that is Fahrenheit, but I'll get to that later, I guess. But the big thing for Sony this year was PS4 VR, which I don't give a crap about, but I did find it very amusing that they showed off Skyrim VR, because that's what we really wanted, obviously, as well as Monster of the Deep Final Fantasy XV, which is a fishing game. Because what people really want in a Final Fantasy spin-off is a fishing game. Oh, Square Enix, you and your utterly baffling business decisions. Anyway, moving on to the last game they covered, they showed off the upcoming Spider-Man game, which looks like pretty much just Batman Arkham, but Spider-Man. It doesn't look very good. Looks like a mess of QuickTime events and just mashing X to win. Don't mind me, I'm just gonna go over and take a nap, and just let me know whenever they get around to not just copy-pasting the Batman Arkham formula in numerous games. Anyway, moving on, the Nintendo show covered Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Now, I do have the first game and, of course, Xenoblade Chronicles X, so I'll be taking a look at those when I get the chance. But Chronicles 2, I can say one thing about so far. Holy crap, the voice acting is bad. Because other than that, their trailer was not much more than, here's a bunch of shiny objects being dangled in front of your face. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see on that. They showed off a new Kirby game that they're developing for next year, which I don't care about because it's Kirby and I've never liked Kirby. They showed off Pokken Tournament DX, which is Pokemon fighting, I guess? Look, I really don't know why people like Pokemon so much. It is really just not a very good series. They re-release the same thing over and over and over again with very slight tweaks and say, it's totally new, guys, don't worry. And I don't say that as someone who has never played a Pokemon game. I say that as someone who last actually got anything at all out of a Pokemon game when he played Red and Blue. And at least I can say with those, oh, they were pretty much simultaneous releases, therefore it's kinda okay, I guess. Then you get to the later releases in the series, and it's just the same thing over and over and over again. I don't know why people like it so much. But whatever, it's a big moneymaker for Nintendo, so more power to them, I guess. They did announce that Metroid Prime 4 is in development, which I'm a bit confused about why they would go ahead and do Metroid Prime 4, considering from what I understand, Metroid Prime 3 pretty definitively ends the Prime series. Now, I may be wrong on that since I haven't actually finished Metroid Prime 3 yet, because I'm still working on Metroid Prime 1, so we'll get there when we get there. But from what I've heard, the third game pretty definitively ends the Prime series, so going with 4 is a little bit baffling. But hey, again, big moneymaker for Nintendo, and they're going back to Metroid, which is kind of neat. For a while, they were thinking they kind of forgot that that series existed. Anyway, moving on, they did show off some of Fire Emblem Warriors, which I believe is actually releasing this year, so that's kind of neat. I'm not necessarily looking forward to it as much as I'm curious to see how it turns out, because the only frame of reference I have for the Dynasty Warriors series is actually Dynasty Warriors Gundam and Hyrule Warriors. And of the two, Hyrule Warriors is considerably more enjoyable despite also being ridiculously repetitive. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see on that, but I am a Fire Emblem fan, so there is that. They also showed off some DLC for The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Please stop asking me about that. I am working on it, and I probably will not be able to review it until next year, so just stop asking about it. But regardless, the DLC is on its way, and it looks really underwhelming. But beyond that, the announcements were really just nothing to write home about. I mean, we got Splatoon 2, there's another friggin' Yoshi game, there's another Mario game called Super Mario Odyssey, which admittedly looks somewhat interesting, but I've never really liked the Mario games other than Super Mario Bros. They also pointed out the upcoming Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom battle that Ubisoft is working on, and I'm not really sure how to feel about that. On the one hand, I'm not really sure how a tactical turn-based game set in Mario with Rabbids would work, but on the other hand, it is nice to see that the Switch is going to get at least some third-party support, so there is that. But overall, there really wasn't anything at the Nintendo show that really grabbed my interest. There were a couple of things I'm like, okay, that might be kind of cool later on down the line, but I'm still not sold on Nintendo Switch. It'll take more exclusives and more interesting first-party and third-party games on there to really pique my interest. Because as it stands, what have we got? Well, we've got a few first-party titles that aren't really system sellers, and we got Breath of the Wild, which I already have on the Wii U, so there's no point in me picking up a Switch for that either. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see how that one rolls out. But other than that, there really weren't all that many announcements at this year's E3 that looked particularly interesting. Instead, we got a lot of, ooh, look at the 4K graphics, and ooh, look at VR, and that was kinda it. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still have a monster backlog to deal with, so I can still go through that over the coming year and be just fine, but as far as the releases that they showed off at E3 this year, just wasn't really impressed with them. Most of it is just more of the same stuff we've been seeing since the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 generation, just with prettier graphics, and that's getting pretty stale at this point. Good graphics does not equate to good gameplay or story, as you'll readily attest if you've played Star Wars Battlefront 2015. That game looks and sounds utterly amazing, but the gameplay is awful, and there's no story to it whatsoever. And then with the likes of Call of Duty World War II, we're not only going back to the previous generation of consoles, we're going back almost 20 years. But I guess this is what we've come to, just re-releasing the same thing years later and just saying, oh, it's in VR now, and that makes it better, right? No, it doesn't. I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't expect sequels to wildly deviate from the formula that was established in previous games, but at least improve upon it, make it more interesting, add more things to it that actually do make it feel different. But in so doing, don't lose track of what made the series good to begin with, like in, say, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild's case. But don't worry, I'll get to that eventually, probably next year, after I review all the other 3D Zelda games. But anyway, to sum up E3 this year, very disappointing, focused way too much on gimmicks and not enough on the games themselves and actually putting out interesting titles. I guess we'll have to wait for PAX or Gamescom to really get anything interesting as far as what might be coming out next year, but as for the rest of this year's announcements, I'm not impressed and I'm really not looking forward to much of anything. But that's okay, I've got plenty to work on in my backlog. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you all in later videos.